All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be looking at the Ohio State secondary and why this is unquestionably the top-ranked secondary going into the 2024 college football season. At least as we creep into February, a lot's going to change, of course. But right now, I think this is a secondary that's going to continue to progress and may even compete for one of the best in college football history with the likes of Jim Knowles and all this talent coming back. Ohio State only allowed one play of 40-plus yards through the air last season. The secondary is rock solid. They were top 10 in numerous categories, especially when it comes to opponents' passing plays in terms of, air yardage. The Buckeyes secondary has improved immensely, Nick. Before Jim Knowles arrived, they had seemed to regress to a good tune. Even a couple years ago when they played Michigan, McCarthy was able to put some bombs on them through the air. And the Buckeyes were a completely different unit this season due to great coaching, a lot of trust, a lot of communication now in this back end. And they only get better. Ohio State has a lot of momentum. Early in December, it seemed like things were really going to fall off. They had a lot of players who had NFL draft decisions to make. They didn't really have much momentum on a quarterback, and all of that is flipped. They have pretty much everybody coming back other than guys like Marvin Harrison Jr. They were able to snag that quarterback, and now this defense has immense talent together for 2024. Nick, what was your remarks from last year in 2023 from the secondary, and then, what are your kind of expectations before we break down these players?
I thought this was a very good secondary last year that showed a lot of improvement throughout the season. Like you said, only one play of 40-plus yards. So clearly they were a really solid unit of keeping the play in front of them, limiting the passing attempts that these teams have. They really looked controlled in the passing game. And they didn't have obviously the season didn't go great in Columbus, right? Ryan Day and company. They want to be competing for national titles. Losing to Michigan again was not what they had on the schedule for them this year. And that was certainly disappointing. But I think by and large, this defense, especially the secondary unit, was very strong. Jim Knowles is continuing to craft together here a great unit top to bottom that has some really solid players. They're really great in coverage, and they go into the portal and add arguably the best player available in the portal, who we'll get to in a minute, in Caleb Downs. So certainly they've made the work to continue to improve what was already a strong unit. A lot of guys returning. There was, like I said, a ton of question marks in Columbus. They didn't really have a quarterback. They go out, get a quarterback. They go out and make some other works. And they're continuing to plug in pieces left, right, and center and set this up. They got a new offensive coordinator, though I think Bill O'Brien may be leaving for a different job at the Boston College job. But overall, spirits got to be high in Columbus right now. They're making the right moves here. And I think it starts with the secondary, which is a fantastic unit, a great leadership role, and a great way to get these guys, consistently getting minutes and good locker room presence.
We'll go ahead and start right there with Caleb Downs. Nick Saban abruptly retires. The positional coaches leaves for Georgia. Downs was highly recruited by the Bulldogs in the high school cycle as a high-end 5-star. He ends up going to Ohio State, though. I think a lot of people had this on the radar. I thought he was going to be a lock for Georgia. I was wrong, Nick. Downs heads to Ohio State. Josh Proctor departs. That's the only guy leaving in the secondary. And this is massive for them based on what they're going to be able to do in terms of scheming. When you look at Downs, though, a player, again, who was highly recruited. His brother Josh was great at UNC. He's going to be a future NFL player for a long time. You look at Alabama, though, in the first couple of weeks of the season, he really struggled. I said going into that Texas game, I was like, these safeties are probably going to have a poor day against Ewers and those pass catchers. That was his lowest graded coverage game of his career. He also had a season-high 4 missed tackles. It was abysmal, right, in week 2, especially in weeks 1 and 3 as well. After that, though, we really kicked in the high gear, finally started showcasing that talent, Nick, in coverage, and is, a downhill thumper, a guy who plays with great discipline, showcases great athletic ability. He was a great performer for Alabama all year long, made some great plays against Georgia as well. I know it was a 3rd and short or 4th and short where he just comes downhill out of nowhere, boom, lays the hit. They're short, and they force a punt off of his great individual play. That's what you have here in Caleb Downs. We'll get to the scheming here in a second because, again, I think that's magnificent for what Knowles is going to be able to do. But overall, in terms of an individual talent, this is one of the best ones out there on the block. I know Georgia's very upset they let him get away.
Some eyes were batted, and people were confused when Nick Saban rolled out a true freshman in his defensive unit in the start of the season against Middle Tennessee. It's not often that a true freshman starts in the SEC in a high-level program, especially under Nick Saban. It's very rare. You don't see that. But Downs went out there, and it was rough at first, certainly, right? He struggled at times against Middle Tennessee State, against Texas, against USF. There was that clip going around of where the offensive player for USF basically ran him over, and he really had bad form on the tackling there. there. He had 10 tackles against Texas and 8 tackles against Middle Tennessee, and the tackles have never been an issue. 107 total tackles, 70 solo tackles for him. The coverage had been an issue early on. It was spotty, but he got better throughout the season, looked great against Ole Miss, looked great against Mississippi State and Texas A&M, 13 tackles against State, had 13 tackles against LSU as well, so certainly improved. Had a pick against State, had a pick against A&M as well, forced fumble against Texas, involved in special teams as well, returned a few punts here and there in the second half of the season, including one for a touchdown. So he has a whole wide amount of talent, obviously. When he entered the portal, I think every single Alabama fan, myself included, was very, very scared that he was going to go to Georgia or have to play him at the start, at the end of September and see him again. So kind of a bullet dodged him going to Columbus. Obviously losing a player of that caliber sucks, and there's no sugarcoating that. But Nick Saban retiring means that he wants to go be somewhere else, and I can't say I necessarily blame him, even though I'm disappointed. And I think the fit with the coaching there in Columbus is a great fit. I think he fits in perfectly. He can move him around, get him involved. He's such a talented player and has a whole great plethora of skill sets to use in this setup here in Columbus.
And I think what excites me most is Sonny Styles, likely moving the linebacker with the addition of Caleb Downs was my initial reaction, and that certainly wasn't anything that was too wild to be thought of. I think a lot of people probably felt that they're close to the program, the fan base. I think that's kind of the sentiment we all shared. This is a guy who does a great job of making plays in the box. A sound wrap-up tackler, very good run defender, listed at 6'4", 230 this past season. Just not the size you want playing in the back end if you're ever, in a pure cover 2 or cover 1. He was strictly in the box or in the slot, but then he was forced to play strong safety the back half of the season with the injury to Dalton Ransom. And that's when inconsistency started to happen. He took a bad angle versus Blake Corum, for example, in the second half, allowed a big touchdown there, really swung momentum back to the Wolverines. He was never a liability by any means in coverage, but this is a better use for his skills. Figures to be one of the nation's more versatile defenders this season. Again, he's not the worst player in the world to have at the safety position if you have to do that. I think he filled in admirably as a former 5-star. You're going to get that certainly. But again, there were some inconsistencies there in the back half of the season. And this is great win-win for all. Styles, with his size and his skills, can be in more of that natural position he was in a season ago. He was kind of a hybrid defender, while Caleb Downs anchors that safety position in the back end. Again, a win-win here. Knowles is going to have a lot of fun. I'm very excited for Styles' potential in 2024.
I think Styles has the highest upside at linebacker. Moving him in there, playing him inside, I think makes a lot more sense. 3 total tackles for Styles this year, 4.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and a pass breakup. Not as great in coverage, had some poor coverage grades here. Missed a few tackles here and there. Plugging him in at linebacker, I think makes a lot of sense. Putting him in at wide linebacker could work out a lot for this team. Like you said, Knowles has a lot of options here to move around and plug in different pieces into his 4-2-5 setup here. Having Downs gives him more flexibility, allowing Styles to play what I think is a more natural role for him.
Yeah, most certainly. I'm very excited to see what happens there. You continue to look at the safety group. Dalton Ransom only played in 8 games, missed the last month of the season like we just alluded to, but was doing much better in coverage. In the past, this guy did very well defending some of the nation's best tight ends. I think Sam Laporta, he looked very good against in the past. Brock Bowers as well. Willing tackler in the box. He hits with some authority. The route recognition, the closing speed's evident. He himself has been inconsistent, though, in coverage due to some bad visions. The more, complex route combos certainly led to some slower progression. And then shedding blocks was inconsistent. He seemed to show some vast improvements in all these areas this past season. It was unfortunate he got hurt, but that was just the saving grace for getting another veteran back, Nick, was him getting hurt. Because, the sentiment all these guys share is they're sick of losing to Michigan. They want to get over that hump. They want to win a national title. And I think even if this player doesn't get hurt, he was coming back for another season. Very excited for what him and Downs could potentially do as a tandem in the back end.
The players and the coaches and the fans are all sick of losing in Columbus. Bringing back Ransom is a fantastic return for this team. A very good veteran leader. I was alluding to earlier in the episode that having that veteran locker room presence is always great for a program like this, especially a program that is struggling to get over. Now, obviously, Jim Harbaugh leaving for the NFL makes the game against Michigan a little bit easier, in my opinion. But now there's no excuses here with the amount of returning production and players they have in the secondary. You got to have these great locker room guys to focus your players, get the energy, get the attitude right. And I think this is a great opportunity to get a good veteran back in Ransom, who's going to hopefully come back fully healthy, have the entire offseason of rehab, and get to that level where he is fully healthy, be able to compete and be a great veteran leadership role in that locker room.
You look at another guy, Malik Hartford, 69 overall recruit in the class of 23, number 5 ranked safety. He played a good bit last year. I'd say he was an above average performer. Had, I think, only 10 tackles, but, showcased good range. He was a nice tackler. Seems to be a player they would trust if he was, be forced into action. And I think he was going to be pegged as a starter if Downs was not coming to Columbus. So something certainly changed. A nice reserve they can continue to build off. A young talent there. Look at the cornerback position. Ohio State didn't have to play too many guys out here last season. Denzel Burke, a guy who's been really talented for a long time. He's back once more. He said he's eyeing a top 10 selection. It seems like he would have been a first or second round pick if he were to declare. He's back, though. Again, the sentiment is these guys are ready to win, and they wanted to do it together as a brotherhood. Length, this is a guy who's confident in press, has the quickness to mirror underneath, nice closing bursts, some great ball skills, 9 PBUs, and 1 interception this past season. What I want to see from Burke, though, and maybe this is too harsh of criticism, it's just he doesn't seem to be that immensely feared corner yet. He's still going to be a top 5, top 10 corner with ease this upcoming season. Certainly top 5. I'll go ahead and label that right now. But I want to see him be a Denzel Ward or a Marshawn Lattimore, Nick. Just a feared corner out wide that is just genuinely locked down on every single play. They don't want to look at it all. Again, a great corner, but that's what I want to see from him because the expectations, you still got to label them for guys. Even if they're going to be first-round picks and they come back to school, we all want to see them progress in some type of way. That's going to be one for me.
There is room for improvement for Burke, a very talented player, but has some room to improve. 24 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, interception, and 9 pass breakups. Good numbers for Burke, but I think he can continue to improve on that. I like where they're going to be able to slot him here. I think he'll look great on that left side. Another guy you're returning that's a good guy to have. I think that season was a little disappointing. Obviously, the pass breakups I think was great at 9, led the team in that regard. But he could have had another pick or two, could have been better in the tackling. I think he needs to work on tackling just a little bit more. But he's a great player to return. Again, returning more talent. That's the theme in Columbus. And that's why this team is very scary coming into this season because they are returning a ton of talent, a ton of hungry guys that want to go out and win.
Yeah, he had one of the worst, worst coverage grades on the team in terms of tackling. Look on the other side, Davidson Sun. This guy was great for them. The Ole Miss transfer. We pondered who would be the number 2 corner coming in the last year, and he ended up being the one that emerged. He did allow the most yards of any defensive back, but they rarely rotated outside corners. He played 650 snaps, and the total is only 353 yards. This was a guy who was a highly regarded run defender, loves to attack the legs of opposing runners. He had, the best missed tackle percentage on the team. He rarely missed for playing the most snaps of anybody. This player should quietly mold into a household name, I think, in 2024, Nick. Burke, obviously the expectations are there for him, a first-round talent. Sun, though, with his abilities, I think this is going to be a great player this upcoming season. This is going to be a great 1-2 punch. Someone who certainly didn't get enough love. Phenomenal player. I love what he was doing last season. I think he's going to continue to build off of that, and he'll be an elite player this upcoming season.
Son's a great player. 59 total tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, 5 pass breakups for him, 2 fumble recoveries as well. Good player in coverage, a player that's underrated in the grand scheme of things. A transfer, maybe that's potentially why he gets a little underrated here. Some people might reference that, but I think he's a great player. 3rd leading tackler on the team, the highest tackler in the secondary. A good, hard-hitting player at cornerback. Slots in on that right side, works out perfectly. A good physical player. As long as he continues to improve his coverage skills and continues to keep up that momentum tackling, I think he'll be a great leader for this defense.
Yeah, and you look at Jordan Hancock, you also kind of wondered who would be the full-time slot. Would someone emerge in that role? He ended up doing it. Ended up becoming the full-time slot, really delivered in that spot, had 2 picks and 5 pass breakups, showcasing some nice closing abilities of his own. Jermaine Matthews, one of the guys who filled in for Burke at outside corner. Again, they didn't rotate very often. Matthews saw some time due to Burke being hurt at parts of the year. A 4-star true freshman, was really good, was sticky in man coverage, was always right in phase with the wide receivers. I noticed he's a real handsy player, though, but wasn't called for a single penalty, Nick. So, that's some good football IQ, though. He's showing that he knows what he can get away with, shows great anticipation as well. Much like Igbeson Matthews, a highly underrated player who I thought was a star, is just a true freshman. These guys aren't getting enough love, and I think when we get closer to the summer, these guys will probably start to get some more notion. But right now, Nick, I'm in love with some of these defensive backs they have. This is going to be a great year.
Hancock's a solid player, 41 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 2 picks. He actually had a return run for a touchdown. He ended up having 133 return yards on those 2 picks, 66.5 average. Great numbers there. That's pretty interesting stat to look at. 5 pass breakups for him. Hancock, a good player that they can move around. I think he's got a lot of decent experience so far at nickel, kind of move him around. I think he's a really solid, good player to continue to return, a guy that's only going to get better as time goes on than Jermaine Matthews, a younger player who got limited experience, but again, again, as a true freshman, getting that experience, playing parts of 11 games, 13 total tackles, a pick, which he returned for a touchdown, and 3 pass breakups. Good production there. This is nice returning defensive production here. This team is a nice ball hawking unit that can get interceptions and return them. They're very physical and agile athletes. That bodes well for this system. I think as long as you have really good athletes in the system, the 4-2-5 works out great, especially in a league like the Big Ten. This can continue to work out great for this Ohio State defense.
Yeah, and they also picked up, true freshman-wise, 3 4-stars in Bryce West and Aaron Scott at corner. Then safety Garrett Stover, the cousin of tight end Cade, who's departing for the NFL. This is incredibly deep secondary, I would say, the addition of Caleb Downs for a team that was first nationally in passing yards per game allowed, the only secondary in college football to allow less than 2,000 yards. Great numbers, right? And obviously the schedule's going to be a little bit tougher in the Big Ten. You really don't face the craziest passing attacks, but I would certainly pair this secondary up against any passing attack in the country, Nick, and I think they'd have great success. I'm very excited for what's going to go down. Hope they are going to be able to remain healthy on this side of the ball. Hope that we get to see Styles play in that versatile hybrid role. And then I think Downs is going to be a phenomenal addition with his toughness. It's already primed up for this conference. A lot going on here for the Buckeyes, Nick. The momentum is back in Columbus. They have a lot going on, especially on this back end. I think the Jim Thorpe Award winner is probably sitting in the secondary, and if it's not, would you consider that a disappointment?
I think I would consider it a disappointment. I think the Jim Thorpe winner has to be somewhere in this secondary unit. A great freshman class as well. Scott, West, and Stover, all high-end 4-stars, all in-state, all from Ohio, keeping all these players in-state. West, the one that intrigues me the most, 5'11", 177. I think that's an interesting frame. Stover and Scott are a little bit bigger. They both have a little bit bigger in different regards. Scott a little bit, or Stover 214, 6 foot, Scott 6'9", 190. But I like West, his size at 5'11", 177. I think it's an interesting size. Coming out of Cleveland, Ohio. This is a great unit in terms of the current players on the roster, a great unit of the recruiting class, and you add in Caleb Downs, a recipe for success, in my opinion. I've always been a big fan of the 4-2-5. Like I said, as long as you have the athletes to do it, and they certainly have those players in droves here in Columbus.
That'll be it for today's episode. I appreciate you joining me, Nick. It's only February, but we're already amped up. This is what we live and breathe. I think the Buckeyes are going to be so fun to watch in how many ever months we are away. It's going to be a long off season, Nick, but a lot to digest here. Final thoughts.
Fantastic unit, fantastic team, top to bottom. Super excited to see what this team can do in the new look Big Ten.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.